Episode 8, John D. Rockefeller, the 40-Day Massacre, how John D. Rockefeller built a $400 billion empire at 31. Just 31. So here's the question. What if the greatest business strategy ever executed wasn't about innovation at all, but about elimination? John D. Rockefeller once told a colleague, "Don't say that I ought to do this or that. We ought to do it. Never forget that we are partners. Whatever is done for the general good is done for the good of us all." He was lying. Within weeks, 22 of his 26 partners would be gone, absorbed, eliminated, consolidated into an empire that would control 90% of America's oil refining before Rockefeller turned 35. I'm Jason Allen Scott. I've been in business for 35 years. See, I did that, 35. I've sold or been involved in 9 exits. I've started 11 companies and 1 fiasco company. I've run a 7-figure solo business with no staff, and I've distilled everything I've learned from those experiences and 3 decades of building businesses into lessons that truly matter for achieving a new life, a rich life. That's what I want for every single one of you. And by the way, my goal is just that, for one person to start an empire, for one person to watch these episodes or listen to these episodes and learn from people far greater and smarter and wiser and more rich than I will probably ever be in finance, but by the sounds of these stories, maybe never as rich as I have been in life with the friends I've got, the experiences I've had, and the people I've got to meet. But before we get into that, we've got to talk about our headline sponsor, which is www.pitchcapital. And honestly, if you are starting a business and raising money, there is no better place. Even if you're not raising money and you're just trying to see a visual representation of the business that you're trying to make, www.pitchcapital.com is the place to go. I wish this had existed 20 years ago, if not before then, actually. I've raised capital. That's the truth. But I've only raised it twice. I've been on both sides of the table as well. I've also invested in companies. I currently am a co-owner of more than one company. Don't do much in it, I'm not going to lie. I work with incredible people, partners. But I've invested in companies, and I've raised money, once through a podcast, $2.1 million US, and once by myself and very luckily 7 days, probably because of my success record, of 1 million. But most people I speak to, most founders I speak to, tell me that I have just got lucky, that it is brutal, that it is 6 to 12 months of your life grinding through decks, emails, rejections, and meetings that are almost impossible to schedule. And when they are scheduled, they go nowhere. And that's where our headline sponsor comes in. www.pitchcapital.com is the world's first AI fundraising platform that automates your entire capital raising journey. You upload your business details, and in 90 seconds, you've got an investor-ready pitch deck with financial models. Then their AI matches you with the right investors. They have investors from pre-seed all the way to Series C+. The AI handles everything from outreach to booking you meetings, and you can even close deals through their secure escrow system. They've compressed 6 to 12 months of nightmarish work into something that's actually beautifully efficient. If you're raising capital right now, check them out. And if you're not raising capital, by the way, but you just want to build a pitch deck in 90 seconds, 90 seconds, that's insane. Definitely check out pitchcapital.com. The links are in my show notes. They're also in the description. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see a link if you're an investor and you want to find these incredible founders. We already have, I think, a $3 billion worth, or Pitch Capital has $3 billion worth of investment waiting for the right businesses. And there is a link for founders to go on and get on the waiting list to get that money from those investors. Now, let me tell you about the most valuable lesson I ever learned. Today's story is about a 31-year-old man who engineered what historians would later on call the Cleveland Massacre, the acquisition of 22 competitors in 40 days, who built a cartel so sophisticated it took Congress to dismantle it, who became the richest person in history by understanding one simple truth: control the rails, control the oil. And that brings me to today's source material, Titan, The Life of John D. Rockefeller Sr. by Ron Chernow, a 700-page biography that reveals not the mythology of the robber baron, but the methodology behind the monopoly. Sometimes I write these things, right? I either think, oh, I'm a genius for coming up with that, or I think this is going to be a nightmare to say. And then I'll say it in one take, like I just did. And I'll be like, oh, I just felt good. That was oral beauty. That should give you an eargasm. Anyway, the story of John D. Rockefeller, not the villain or the philanthropist, but the strategist, is the story we're going to get into today. A story of how one minute I'm patting myself on my back for my oral dexterity, and the next minute I am stumbling over the simplest of words. But let's get back to it. Today's story is how one man's systematic elimination of competition didn't just build Standard Oil. It invented modern corporate consolidation, vertical integration, and the multinational corporation. There it is. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is see an entire industry as a problem to be solved, not a market to be served. Act 1. The spark that changed everything. The refinery on the red clay banks. It's 1863. Rockefeller is 24 years old. He's choosing a location for his first oil refinery. Most people would pick downtown Cleveland. It's closer to customers, it has easier access to workers, and it is by far more prestigious. But Rockefeller picks a 3-acre parcel on the sloping red clay banks of Kingsbury Run. It's 1.5 miles outside of city limits. Cows graze peacefully. Trees shade the waterway. And it seems inauspicious. But Rockefeller sees something others miss. The site adjoins new railway tracks. The Atlantic and the Great Western Railroad has just launched a route giving Cleveland access to New York City and the Peninsula oil fields. Able to ship by water or over land, Rockefeller gained the critical leverage he needed to secure preferential rates on transportation, which is why he agonized over plant locations throughout his career. Location, location, location. And this is never about convenience and is always about power. If railroads won't give him favorable rates, he'll ship by water. That threat, that leverage, is all that matters. To him, location isn't about logistics. It's about negotiation position. This insight that transportation costs matter more than production costs will make Rockefeller the richest man in written history. The crisis that created the opportunity. By the late 1860s, the oil industry was dying. Low kerosene prices devastated refineries. Profit margins between crude and refined oil shrank to a vanishing point. Rampant speculation tripled refining capacity beyond what the market needed at the time. By 1870, Rockefeller estimated 90% of all refineries were operating in the red. In other words, operating in debt. A leading Cleveland rival offers to sell his interest to Rockefeller's brother, William, at just 10 cents on the dollar as the entire industry faced ruin. But the market isn't self-correcting. Adam Smith's invisible hand is simply broken. Rockefeller says in his own words, so many wells were flowing that the price of oil just kept falling. Yet people just kept on drilling. Later, he explains the real problem. Oftentimes, the most difficult competition comes not from the strong, the intelligent, the conservative competitor, but from the man who is holding on by the eyelids and is ignorant of the costs. And anyway, he's got to keep running or bust. This is the insight that changes everything. Individual excellence cannot overcome systematic failure. Now, what's brilliant about this is in the episode of Leonardo Del Vecchio, the cursed episode of Luxottica, we realize the importance of excellence. But excellence, even perfection, cannot overcome systematic failure. Rockefeller could run the most efficient refinery Cleveland had ever seen, but it wouldn't matter if the industry itself collapsed. If the industry collapses, everyone dies. Instead of just attending to his own business, he began to conceive of the industry as a gigantic, interrelated mechanism and thought in terms of strategic alliances and long-term planning. Rockefeller would stop thinking about his own refinery, and he would start thinking about the entire industry as a system to be controlled. A trailblazer who improvised solutions without any guidance from economic textbooks, he began to envision a giant cartel that would reduce overcapacity, it would stabilize prices, and it would rationalize the industry. And this is the birth of Standard Oil. Not a company so much as a system. The incorporation that changed business history. It's January 10th, 1870, and the partnership of Rockefeller, Andrews, and Flagler is dissolved. In its place, Standard Oil Company, a joint stock corporation with $1 million in capital, which, by the way, is $11 million in today's money. Though, keep in mind, this book was written over 20 years ago, so adjust accordingly. Rockefeller becomes president of the company. His brother William, vice president. Henry Flagler, who had the idea to incorporate the business in the first place, becomes the secretary and treasurer. The name itself, by the way, is marketing genius. Standard advertises uniform quality at a time when consumers fear explosions from impure kerosene. But here's what truly matters. With $1 million in capital, the new company becomes an instant landmark in business history, for there was no other concern in the country organized with such capital. So what does that mean? There was no company at that time that had that much cash on hand. So already he's writing history. He's seen as something incredible. And the name Standard Oil, not dangerous oil, not you can't trust me oil, Standard Oil. Standard Oil instantly controls 10% of American petroleum refining, plus barrel-making plants, plus warehouses, plus shipping facilities, and a fleet of tank cars. Rockefeller is just 31 years old. His vision? Even then, the Standard Oil Company will someday refine all the oil and make all the barrels. And by the way, spoiler alert, he gets terrifyingly close. One other crucial decision that is really important to bear in mind is he doesn't allow any salaries for leadership. They profit solely from share appreciation and rising dividends. He's basically saying, when we win, we all win. But if we don't win, no one gets paid. Rockefeller thought that this idea was more potent. It was a more potent stimulus to work, right? He's saying, forget that. I'll tell you an interesting story. I was once worked for as a consultant for this company, CI Events, which is part of Flight Center. And Flight Center had this incredible CEO. I want to say his name was Chris. Chris took me for breakfast. Chris was incredible. But Chris, in Flight Center, you could see everyone's salaries. You could see what everyone made. The ability to be transparent was really important to Screw Turner. Screw Turner is the founder of Flight Center. He's kind of like the more brash Richard Branson, if you will. Also, he has a great book. Definitely check out Screw Turner. But you could see Chris's salary, and Chris's salary was tiny for a CEO of a company that big, that was made up of so many parts, that did such good work, that was predominantly profit creating. He had a tiny salary, but his commissions were ginormous. Chris, I hope you don't mind me telling the world this. I don't think I signed an NDA or anything. But why? Because they wanted to incentivize potent stimulus of work. They wanted to say, if you do the work, you will get paid. Right? You will win if we all win. And this single decision aligning all incentives around ownership, well, it made Rockefeller the richest man in history. The appreciation of Standard Oil stock would become his entire fortune. Act 2, the red string. The massacre strategy. What we see in Rockefeller's story reveals a pattern completely different from every founder we've studied so far, which is the competitive advantage of systematic elimination over competitive excellence. If you remember, Ford built better cars. Edison built better inventions. Disney built better entertainment. Walton, coming up in episode soon, built better retail. Jobs built better integration. And Ray Kroc from McDonald's, he built better franchises. But Rockefeller didn't build better refineries. He built a system that made competition impossible. The South Improvement Company. It was late 1871, and Rockefeller engineers the covert acquisition of Bostwick and Tilford, New York's premier oil buyers. The acquisition is renamed J.A. Bostwick and Company and brazenly feigned independence of Standard Oil while acting as its cat's paw. What does this mean? There's a lot in this book where I've had to sort of go off and try and understand what these things meant. And a lot of the time, it's old language, old American, by the way, language, which is, I'm so far removed from. I can't even tell you. I was born in Cape Town, South Africa. You know, we had British TV for like the first 5 years of my life. We had no TV actually the first 5 years of my life, but in the next 7 years of my life, I don't think we even had American TV. We had British TV. But a lot of it just meant that this company was completely separate, but at the same time, it had power, and it was a powerful company against an even more powerful company, but it still acted. It acted as part of the whole, right? It may have seemed far away from the whole idea, but it in fact was still a part of what Rockefeller was doing. And this pattern, buying competitors but maintaining the illusion of independence. In other words, everyone thought, these companies are all separate. They weren't separate, right? They're all part of the same cat. They're all part of the same big company. But this idea will define Rockefeller's career. He built a network of hundreds of shell companies, competitors who don't know who owns them, right? And they're not competitors, right? They look like competitors. It's like, again, when I was a kid and I went to the store, it was called The Hut. If anyone's from Rugby, South Africa, I don't know if The Hut's still there, but it used to be called The Hut. And it was run by this woman I'd meet years later in high school. And I went to a very different high school in a very different area. Her name was Rochelle. Rochelle, if you're listening. Her mom was amazing. And I was very, very poor, so I could afford nothing. And it's a whole nother story. But there was Coke, only Coke for predominantly my entire childhood. And then one day there was Fanta. And Fanta was the competition to Coke. At least I thought so. I would find out later on that Coke owned Fanta. So these were not competitors to Coke. They were owned by Coke. And this is exactly the same thing that Rockefeller is doing. He is building a network of hundreds of shell companies. These competitors, inverted commas, for those who are sight impaired and can't see me or just listening to me, they don't even know who owns them. He is moving these pieces around. And then comes the master stroke, the South Improvement Company. And here's how it works. Railroads sharply raise freight rates for all refiners. But this company that I just mentioned, right, which is the South Improvement Company, the SIC, SIC members, well, they receive 50% rebates on their shipments. Even better, SIC members receive drawbacks on shipments made by their refineries. So let me give you an example in case some of this wording is confusing. Standard Oil gets 40-cent rebate on every barrel it ships, plus another 40 cents for every barrel shipped by its competitors. And as a bonus, SIC members receive comprehensive information about oil that is shipped by all competitors. So one Rockefeller biographer called the drawbacks an instrument of competitive cruelty, unparalleled in human history. He had all the information. He owned all the companies. He had a crazy system of how to get paid from every single person that played in the world that he created. So I want you to think about this. You're competing against Rockefeller, but every barrel you ship, he gets paid, and he knows exactly how much you're shipping. All in all, it's an astonishing piece of knavery, a grand-scale collusion such as American industry at that point had never, ever witnessed. And here's the question you may be asking yourself right now. Why would railroads even agree to this? Because they're also destroying each other in the price wars. They need someone to arbitrate their disputes and save them from their own cutthroat tactics. And Rockefeller, he becomes their empire. Rockefeller becomes their umpire, right? Like a cricket umpire or a baseball umpire, someone that can ensure that each railroad receives a predetermined share of oil traffic. Pennsylvania Railroad gets 45%, Erie gets 25%, New York Central gets 27%. Rockefeller's supreme insight was that he could solve the oil industry's problems by solving the railroad's problems at the exact same time. He is creating a double cartel, a cartel in rail and a cartel in oil. But there's one more genius move that Rockefeller's about to do. Rockefeller has begun accumulating hundreds of tank cars. If railroads don't play along at his plan, he can simply ship without them using the water instead. He's basically saying, I will use you trains, and I will give you work, and I will make sure that no one fights each other, and I will give you fair percentages, but if you mess with me, I have a plan B. I have tankers waiting on shore that will simply cross the waters. The SIC is leverage incarnate. The 40-day massacre. The SIC becomes public knowledge. People start working out what is going on, and competitors are furious. Producers pressure Congress. Pennsylvania legislature cancels the charter. On April 8th, 1872, Rockefeller capitulates. In other words, he gives up. He telegrams the oil producers, all SIC contracts are now void. He says, we're done. We're out. I get it. Like, I played a good game. I made a lot of money. I'm okay stepping away. Let Parliament win. But here's the part that history mostly misses. The SIC never ships a single barrel. It never collects a single rebate. In his own words, he says, there was never a shipment made or a rebate or drawback collected under the self-improvement plan. But the threat was enough. The threat of him having a plan B, the threat of him controlling so much, is all that was needed for America, politicians and policy makers to step in, and at the same time to do whatever he wants. Between February 17th and March 28th, 1872, just 40 days, Rockefeller swallows up to 22 of his 26 competitors. At age 31, he becomes the world's largest oil refiner. How? What have I missed here, Jason? Well, the SIC is this, as I mentioned, invisible club that he waves over the Cleveland refiners, forcing them to submit to his domination. He's basically saying, I have all the power. You've seen what I can do. People quake in their boots when I come to get them. So unless you want to be a competition with me, let me just buy you out. And his competitors look at these SIC terms and they realize if this happens, we're dead. If he actually gets away with this, if legislature doesn't step in, if Parliament doesn't step in, if he fights them and wins, we all go out of business. So it is better to sell now and get something than fight and get nothing. Which reminds me of a divorce I had once. Rockefeller doesn't need the SIC to work. He never did. He never even implemented it. He just needed it to exist long enough to terrify his competitors into selling. So basically, he's running around telling them, like, this is what's going to happen. I own the railroads, or at least I basically own them because I've got this system where I know exactly how many oil barrels you're putting out there. I know exactly how much they're charging, and I'm doing deals with people that work with me, and I've got a bunch of companies that you think are my competitors that I actually own. And he is just scaring the bejesus out of everyone. And they're just like, if he gets away with this, we're gone. So we're better off selling. And this is what historians will call the Cleveland Massacre. The national expansion of Cleveland, by the way, is just the beginning. Rockefeller replicates the strategy over and over again. He replicates the strategy nationwide. Different tactics, same outcome. Systematic elimination of all his competition. By September 1875, Standard Oil forms Acme Oil Company, a front organization to take over all the local refiners. Within months, 27 refineries are either bought or leased by John D. Rockefeller. At least one prominent refiner contended that he was subjected to coercion by Standard Oil when he tried to build a new refinery. And the conversation goes like this. Standard Oil says, we'll pay you a good salary to abandon this project you're about to do. The refiner says, no, forget it, I'm going to build it. And Standard Oil says, you could make no money if you do refine oil, because you will not be able to ship it. We've made arrangements with the railroads regarding freight, regarding getting cars. You will make no money. And Van Sickle, that was going to do it, he bows to their superior force. Translation, we Standard Oil control the rails. Your oil is going nowhere. You sell to us now or you lose everything. In May 1875, Rockefeller buys J.N. Camden and Company of Parkersburg, West Virginia, and he renames it Camden Consolidated Oil Company. And here's the genius. Camden's superintendent doesn't know Standard Oil now owns the company. They feared the superintendent of the barrel factory that he might one day recognize that Standard Oil was the inspector. In other words, these guys are not even realizing they are getting bought by one company over and over and over. And he's playing this game with all of them. And it's fear and it's corruption and it's owning distribution. Camden says to Rockefeller, we would prefer having him come here, but don't see how we could do it without exposing the whole thing. In other words, Camden's saying, listen, we can fix all the problems we have if you just come in and admit who you are. But we can't solve this whole thing because you'll never come in and admit who you are, because it'll expose this entire game. There's an expression called a shell game. You know, where you have 3 shells and a pea and you kind of move the shells around. That's what he's doing. He's doing it all the time, but he is the pea. And these companies are the shells, and he just keeps moving them around and no one knows what he's doing. Even superintendents are kept in the dark about the new ownership. What's a superintendent? Someone that runs one of these oil refineries, by the way. But again, why the secrecy? I'll tell you why. Because Camden had been receiving marked down freight rates from the B&O Railroad, specifically to fight Standard Oil. So in other words, he had his own side deal, right? Where he was getting special deals on the side so that he could get his oil on trains. But now, Camden secretly works for Rockefeller while still getting anti-standard oil rates. So they think they're doing this great thing. They're like, he doesn't even realize how we're messing him over. We've got our own deals, our own things. But they don't. Because Camden, who's doing all of this, is secretly working for Rockefeller the whole time. Camden's using those rates to buy up 3 more refineries, who think they're also selling to Standard Oil competition, but actually they're selling to Standard Oil because he owns the competition. The completion of the Baltimore campaign leaves John D. Rockefeller, who, by the way, is still in his 30s, the sole master of American oil refineries. It's also meant that he has now monopolized the world's kerosene market, and few people beyond the oil business had ever heard who he was. This kind of reminds me of Ben. I've forgotten Ben's surname. I can see it. I want to say it starts with an S. Everyone knows, if you go to a gym, you know Gymshark. If you go to airports, you see people in Gymshark clothes. But few people realize the billionaire that is Ben, who started Gymshark. Right? He didn't do social media when he started. He wasn't trying to create a personal brand. He was trying to create great products you could wear to the gym that had one form and function, to be good gym clothes. That's exactly what this guy's done. He did it in the background. He did it with a curtain over him. He didn't need to be in the front. He could manipulate the entire chessboard from behind the curtains. And by the end of the 1870s, when Rockefeller is just 35, Standard Oil refineries, they own 90% of the American oil. 90%! Now, you might be asking, this is a very confusing episode, and as a one-person business owner or a partnership business, just a listener who's thinking about starting a business, how does this come back to me? And that's why in Act 3, we always have the one-person empire toolkit. And I'm calling this one, Your Inner Monopolist. What can we learn from Rockefeller's systematic domination? How do we channel his strategic thinking without building illegal cartels? I'll tell you how. First, think systems, not companies. Rockefeller's breakthrough was this. Instead of just attending to his own business, he began to conceive of an industry as a gigantic, interrelated mechanism, multitude of small pieces serving one part. Most founders optimize their company. Rockefeller optimized the entire industry. He didn't ask, how do I build a better refinery? He asked, what's broken about this industry? How do I fix it in a way that just benefits me? Interesting. There's a book called How to Make a Billion, I think it is, by Bill Jacobs, and we'll do one of these about the book. It's a great book. Same thing. He doesn't look at the smaller companies. He looks at the entire industry. He actually does he makes a couple of billion taking over the garbage industry, because he realizes it's just a couple of mom and pop stores like running these garbage trucks all over. Why isn't there one company? Just buy out all the small players and you become the only player. I think Bill has definitely learned something from Rockefeller. Overcapacity and price wars is a nightmare. But it's only a nightmare if you're in it, not if you're looking to solve it with consolidation. Your equivalent today isn't building a cartel. Please don't build a cartel. It's understanding the systematic problems in your industry that create opportunities for a platform play. Amazon didn't build a better retail. They built an infrastructure, AWS, that solved a systematic problem that everyone was having while generating massive profits. What is your industry systematically broken? Where is the word I'm looking for? Where in your industry is it broken as the system no longer works? What infrastructure could you build that fixes it while creating a dependency on you? Second, control the bottleneck. If you're an agency owner, if you've ever owned an agency, you know that your agency, there's always a bottleneck, and it's always people, right? The more clients you get, the more people you need to service the clients, and you're just like, that's the bottleneck. But you'll learn that as you create companies in different verticals, every company scale is throttled by its bottleneck. So you need to control the bottleneck, not the product. Rockefeller didn't dominate oil refining by building better refineries. He dominates it by controlling transportation. How do they get it out? Oil only has value if it moves. Railroads moved it. So Rockefeller controls the railroad access. Result, competitors could make oil, but they couldn't sell it because they couldn't move it. That is why he agonized over refinery locations, why he accumulated tank cars, why he built his first refinery where he could ship by water or rail. Leverage comes from controlling the bottleneck, not from being good at the thing. What's the bottleneck in your industry? What's not what's hard, but what's scarce? What do all players need access to? That's where the leverage is. Third, move in stealth, not in public. This entire podcast I have built in public. Never done it before. I've tried a few times. If you go through my X thread, and a buddy of mine will remind me when I was like, I'm never going to do a thing in public. He's like, you did try many times and you've never gone through with it. So this time I have gone through with it. I posted on January 7th that I would start a podcast. In 30 days, I would monetize the podcast and I would be on the charts. World Charts is one of the best podcasts out there. And I did it all in public. I've been doing it all in public. My mistakes, my fears. This podcast itself, as you know, is not edited in a way that stops me from looking like a fool. I'm showing it all, how I've done every single step. On X, every day, I share the steps that I've taken. I have a blueprint where I have written down every single step of how I built this podcast, how were the 36 ways to make money from a podcast, the 27 ways to promote the podcast, how to create great storytelling that also leads to great story selling. And it's hard. I think it's actually harder to build in public. And Rockefeller, he doesn't. He moves in stealth. Standard Oil's strategy is to furnish as little information as possible to the public. Rockefeller bought 22 competitors in 40 days. And few people beyond the oil business had ever heard of a guy called John D. Rockefeller. He bought companies but kept them completely independent looking. He built shell corporations and he hid his ownership structures. Why? Because it's a lot smarter to make money quietly so you don't invite competition. I was on a call once with Gary Vaynerchuk, and everyone was asking about personal brand. There's one fantastic guy from Tampa, Florida named Jake. And I think if you go to Jake's Instagram, I guarantee he's got him asking Gary the question on this private call that we were on. I have got the clip somewhere of me saying I don't want to be in the public eye. I actually don't want to do this. I'm doing this for one person. I'm doing this for one person to watch and learn and for them to change the trajectory of their lives. But I'm fighting against every single part of me because of this, because John D. Rockefeller's own words, that it's a lot smarter to make money quietly so you don't invite competition. Why would I want people to know how to use a podcast to make money? Then I've got to compete against all these other podcasters making money. It's a nightmare. When I was in medtech, I didn't tell other people how to make money in medtech until they bought a medtech machine from me, and then I made them money because then they would buy more medtech from me. But I didn't do it to make more competitors. Every time I see one of these people talking about doing something, I think, you're only saying that because you're making money off it. No one is going to purposely tell everyone how you make money because you're just going to build competitors, making it harder for you to make money. Most founders today, they do the opposite. They announce every partnership. They celebrate every win in public. They broadcast every strategy. Rockefeller, one of the richest people in the world, he proved that silence is strength. Success comes from keeping your ears open and your mouth closed. One of my favorite quotes, I think, is from Calisthetics, is God knew what he was doing when he gave us one mouth and two ears so we may listen twice as much as we speak. When you're winning, why would you tell your competitors how you're winning? The fourth rule we can learn from John D. Rockefeller is hire talent as found, not as needed. What does this mean? Taking for granted the growth of his empire, he hired talented people as he found them, not as he needed them. Rockefeller constantly hires people before he knows even what to do with them. But when he sees talent, he hires it, and he figures out the role later. Why? Because when you're building systematically, you know you'll need great people at some point, and it is better to have them ready than scramble when opportunity appears. A Jason Allen Scott saying is it is better to have and not need than need and not have. Rockefeller's competitors became his employees. Henry Rogers fought the SIC, but then he joined the Standard Oil and became one of Rockefeller's closest advisors. And by the way, Mark Twain's best friend, but that is for another tale. He isn't the sort of person to persist in a flawed situation. His belief is that if you can't beat them, buy them, hire them. So this week's challenge is I'd like you to map your industry's bottlenecks, not your business's bottlenecks, your industry's bottlenecks, not your competitors, not your customer, infrastructure. What do all players in your industry need access to? What is scarce in your industry? What causes systematic problems that everyone complains about but nobody fixes? Then ask, could I build it? Could I buy it? Could I control that bottleneck? Rockefeller didn't compete on refining quality. He competed on transportation access. That single insight made him the richest person in human history. Your bottleneck might not be physical infrastructure. It might be distribution. It might be talent. It might be capital access. It might be regulatory knowledge or network effects. By the way, if it's capital access, go check out www.pitchcapital.com. They have a lot of money, and they're looking for people with great business ideas who see opportunity like John D. Rockefeller so they can give you the money so that you can make them more money. I guarantee that somewhere in your industry, there is a choke point. And someone will spot it and control it. So why not you? May 23rd, 1937. John D. Rockefeller dies. The ripe old age of 97 of arteriosclerosis. He'd lived longer than almost any one of his time. And he was survived by his insatiable discipline. I think he survived by his insatiable discipline and his iron will. A death, we estimate that his wealth was somewhere between 300 billion and 400 billion in today's money. Roughly 4 times the wealth of today's richest person. By the way, that might not be true because today, when I was writing up my notes for this, I came across an article, but I didn't get time to fact check it. Always fact check everything. But it said that Elon Musk has just become the richest person in human history with 750 billion. So double check that. But previous to Elon, he was the wealthiest person ever. And here's what he left behind. Standard Oil, which by the way, the Supreme Court broke into 34 companies in the 1911 act. It was called the Sherman Antitrust Act. It's been used multiple times, by the way, since then. An act written specifically at the time because of John D. Rockefeller. Those 34 companies, which, by the way, included ExxonMobil, Chevron, and BP, combined would have a market cap of over $1 trillion. They'd be the biggest company in the world if it wasn't for that Sherman Act. He also, by the way, left the blueprint of every monopolistic tech platform that's ever been built since. The playbook for vertical integration, the template for using infrastructure to control and to dominate a market. Look at Apple. But here's what I find most remarkable. Rockefeller achieved most of this by just 35. By the time most founders are raising Series A, Rockefeller was controlling 90% of all American oil refining. How? Not by building better refineries, but by understanding that whoever controls transportation controls the industry. Not by competing harder, but by making competition impossible against him. And not by innovating great new products, but by innovating brand new business models. Ron Chernow, who wrote the biography, said this about Rockefeller. What makes him problematic and why he continues to inspire ambivalent reactions is that his good side was every bit as good as his bad side was bad. Seldom has history produced such a contradictory figure. Rockefeller gave away $500 million in his lifetime, more than anyone had ever done before him. He funded the eradication of the hookworm in the South. He built the University of Chicago. He created modern medical research, all through his Rockefeller Institute. But he was also ruthless beyond measure, built cartels that crushed competitors, used drawbacks that made rivals pay for his success, and created monopolies that it took Congress and policy and politicians to dismantle. Both things are true. And that's what makes him so fascinating. Every founder I've studied has taught a different lesson. Every founder that we have on these episodes will teach us a different lesson. Ford taught us to democratize through integration. Edison taught us autonomy enables invention. Disney taught us control protects vision. Walton will teach us that simplicity scales and fancy fails. Jobs taught us integration creates magic. And Ray Kroc taught us that platforms beat products. But Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, he teaches us the most uncomfortable truth. Domination beats competition every time. You can build a better product. Someone will copy it. You can create a better process. Someone will improve it. You can deliver a better service. And someone will just match it. But if you can control the infrastructure that everyone needs, you become indispensable. Not better, necessary. And that's not a moral statement, by the way. It's a strategic observation of a guy that hosts a podcast. If we look at history, Amazon didn't win retail by being a better Walmart. They won by building a better infrastructure. AWS, fulfillment, Amazon Prime. The things that everyone else needed. Google didn't win search by being a better Yahoo. Let's be honest. They won by controlling the infrastructure of internet advertising. Facebook didn't win social by being a better MySpace. They won by building infrastructure that makes switching feel catastrophic. The pattern repeats because Rockefeller proved it worked. The question isn't whether you should build a monopoly. That's illegal, by the way. The question is, what infrastructure can you build that makes you indispensable in today's time? What bottleneck could you control? What platform could you own? Rockefeller understood at 31 what most founders never learn. Whoever controls the rails controls everything. In the next episode, we'll explore a founder who took yet another path. Someone who built not through domination, but built through obsessive customer service that created a cult-like loyalty. Until then, map your bottlenecks and remember, the most profitable position isn't making the best product. It's owning the only road to market.